Welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, the show where we help sports coaches and PE teachers learn how they can impact their athletes' movement and physical development in a fun, practical way. I'm your host, Isaac, founder of Athletic Skills, and in today's episode, we'll be chatting again to Josh Marlow, strength and conditioning coach at the Peers School, and we will be discussing why integrating S&C into PE curriculums is important for youth athletes. Also, we'll be discussing what are movement breaks and how they keep kids engaged with PE, and discuss how you may track movement competency and physical development across age groups. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and I hope you enjoy the show. This podcast is brought to you by Brendan Chaplin Business Coaching. Brendan guides coaches and service-based entrepreneurs deliver their best work, run a 7-figure lifestyle and performance business, and create a life of freedom. I started working with Brendan in September 2023, and it's been a great journey since I started working with him in launching my own business, Athletic Skills. Brendan has been fully invested in me and is a great person to chat with, to share ideas, and has vast knowledge and experiences to share also. The reason I picked to work with Brendan is that he has done it himself, launching businesses, and has a similar background to myself in S&C and wants to live a life that you want. If you want to speak to Brendan on how he can help create a life of freedom and guide you on that journey, get in touch with him by one of the methods in the show notes and DM him the word coach, and he will start the conversation. You won't regret it, and there's a good chance it might just change your life too. Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, and I'm delighted to have Josh Marlow back on with me again. So thank you, Josh, for joining again. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, not to worry. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Josh. First, we've had you on before chatting around S&C in schools, so I thought it'd be great to go a bit more into S&C within PE and get a bit more detailed into that area. Firstly, guessing your experience as you're working currently doing S&C within schools, why do you think there is a need for S&C within PE, would you say?
In terms of a logistical point of view, it's a protected amount of time. So in terms of wanting to see a group of kids for a certain amount of time, it's a great way of getting some structured kind of training in to benefit their physical competency. We're looking at the research from like the likes of Cardiff Met, from Josh Wall, Ben Pullen. We know that physical literacy is an area of contention at the moment. It's on its way down. And with that loss of physical literacy, we see that loss of physical confidence. And when we talk about physical confidence, we're not talking about how necessarily we look in terms of an aesthetic point of view, but like our belief in our bodies, right? So like when we're young, I think it's really important that actually we should be able to just look at a task and go, I'm going to give this a go, and not have any worries or particular concerns about not being able to do it. And obviously, as we get older, that's something you hear from older generations is, oh, I just don't feel like I could step back into that. And it's one of the biggest barriers too. If you're like 40-year-old, 50-year-old one wanted to go and play badminton, I think the first excuse you would give is, oh, I'm not fit enough. And I think that's something that we should be taking away and refraining from being part of a conversation with our young people is they shouldn't feel anxious about stepping into a gym. They shouldn't feel anxious about trying a new sport because they don't think they're fit enough. They should be thinking, oh, I've got a good enough physical capacity to give netball a go, or to give badminton a go, or basketball, or athletics, and not feel there's any stigma around their current condition of fitness. So I think it's important that it's something that within PE we should be massively pushing, is drip feeding in some athletic development, some strength training, some resistance training, some plyometrics, whatever your kind of focus or your enjoyment is. And on top of that, just giving them some really basic theoretical knowledge around why it's important to be healthy, why it's important that we are training regularly, like how this improves not only our physical ability on a very basic health level, but also our mental well-being, like how we feel after we work out. And I think that language and what we deliver can be massively varied, and also it can be massively catered to the year group that's in front of us.
And then, because you're working in there day to day and you have been doing for a while, so what the main things do you see around why that participation or why that thing has been dropped off the last few years around that physical competencies and people's ability to move? Any factors you think that are causing that?
Yeah, I think looking at it and trying to think about the research, but also we see on a practical level, obviously the advancement in technology in the last, 30 years has been massive. So obviously when I was younger, maybe when you was younger, I had a simple flip phone that didn't do much else rather than text message and buy the odd dodgy ringtone. So my weekends and my evenings were playing sport, running around in the woods, taking part in sort of simple activities, being outside for as much as I could, riding my bike all the time. And I think this has been lost a little bit in our generations as advancements in technologies have began to take away some of that want or desire. I think the amount of open space nowadays has become more and more limited. And I think there just needs to be a bigger push back towards giving kids freedom of movement for the most part, because obviously if you're trying to deliver something to them, they might not always see the rationale and you might not be in the position to explain the rationale. Whereas if they're going off their own back and getting that training stimulus without thinking it's a training stimulus, it's a really good and sneaky way of keeping kids fit. It's just them doing it themselves because they found something they enjoy within a group of their peers. And that's another thing to touch on is if we can encourage peer groups into the gym or social groups into the gym, your kind of uptake and your buy-in is going to be so much higher. That's why friendship groups are so powerful in terms of exercise.
Yeah, and I think you're tackling quite a few myths as well around fitness and physical activity. I think social media has a lot of great benefits, but then also things around stigmas of how you should look or exercise you should do to get X outcome. So, because everyone wants a six-pack or a beach body. As when I've been working in schools, I've had 14, 15-year-olds saying they're wanting just a six-pack, and they looked on TikTok and they saw that running won't help that. They're saying, "Oh, I'm never going to do running again." So you're trying to tackle these things and showing them what S&C and actual physical activity can bring you, other than just training for a six-pack. Yeah, I'm sure you've had those experiences as well.
Yeah. And it's trying to turn that kind of almost negative into a positive, isn't it? Because if you've got someone coming up to you saying, "Oh, sir, I've seen this on TikTok. I'd like to do this," or "Is this how I should be training?" Then you've already got your buy-in. You've already got someone who's actually quite keen because they're going off their own back to research ways they can improve themselves. So I think that's a really good point, and we should definitely be praising our students first and foremost for them doing that off their own back. And that's where we then need to start steering them into the more beneficial trainings. It doesn't mean they need to not do it at all. Like, I think that's where kind of your age group and what you deliver within your age groups and will massively be different, because you don't want to lose that buy-in by saying, actually, everything you said online is complete rubbish. You should be doing this, because then you're just going to create resistance, and that's where you'll lose them again. Being in the school that I'm in, we have a lot of kids who actually are really switched on in terms of research. So they're coming up and talking to me about like partial length training, about how that's the best way for hypertrophy. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But also being able to squat to full to depth is also really important for your hip joints. So understanding how to balance the training is an area they lack, because that's not quite as prominent when they're on their TikTok or they're on Instagram looking at training. So it can definitely be used as a benefit. It's just you have to be open. And we learn so many good things at undergrad, masters, resources in terms of what we could put in at a school level. But I think it's really important that we don't dive in and try and just deliver everything that we know is super impactful, because ultimately, just because something's super impactful, it probably isn't the most fun thing to do. So again, it's that balance with who's in front of you, thinking about your needs analysis when you're at uni and how you would use that with that person in front of you and say, oh, actually, they're this age, so their emotional maturity might not be at a level where you can say to them, I need you to do this X amount of times over X amount of sessions. And actually, you need to give them some flexibility. Like, we know that people like to do bench and bicep curls. So rather than taking that away completely and being like, you can never do this in your gym, just create a system that makes them do something productive before they get there. And that's exactly what we do at the gym. So before any student can do either of those movements in our gym, they have to do a pulling exercise and a jumping exercise. So we're getting that buy-in, and we're sneakily getting in some more balance within the training at the same time.
Yeah, then compromise is a great way to get their buy-in. And I think also, like you mentioned, if they're coming up with the ideas themselves, then they're more likely to keep that going. And peers as well, if they're seeing students that are coming up with the exercise, then the students are likely to follow. I've had in my sessions some students have led with my guidance, but have led the session, maybe led the warm-up, because they've been more creative than I am, and they're coming up with games or different exercises and still getting good outcomes. So sometimes I think the students are more creative than us in terms of with the right guidance and the learning. I think, that's a great way to use them as well as teachers and drivers for S&C and physical competencies within the school.
Yeah, absolutely. And the kids will always be quicker than you to find good games, because they're still out at lunchtime, they're still out with their friends. So in terms of, depending on how your PE or game sessions are structured in terms of the way in which you group your kids, they've probably already got some good games that they know how to play. If you just apply a little bit of criteria to it, so does it raise pulses? Does it mobilise joints? Has it got something that's going to prime them, make them sprint, make them jump? They've probably got a good game that you can tweak. And then you've got this massive buy-in already because it's their game. And all you've asked them to do is add a bit more effort or a different intensity type. So yeah, massively on that. We try to do that quite a lot within our PE lessons, is get our kids, especially our kind of older, year 9, 10, 11, to lead warm-ups or be really proactive with their coaching of other kids too, because most of our extracurricular slots are not age restricted. So we can have anyone in there from a year 7 to a sixth former. And there's been quite a few times where I've had to maybe go over to instruct or coach before I've gotten there. One of our older kids or even one of our younger kids has gone, actually, that's not quite right. We should be doing it like this. So allowing that innovation, allowing them room to figure stuff out is actually really good for not only their physical development, but their cognition and their ability to make games and think on their feet. So this is the overall message of PE and S&C within PE is it's just another activity and another scenario and environment where we can give kids the chance to figure stuff out. No, children will not hurt themselves in the gym, even if they get some reps wrong, because if you look in any commercial gym, you will see probably, 40% of people doing something wrong. Children's bodies are very robust. They're not just going to break because they've got one goblet squat wrong or they've chosen the wrong weight. They will figure stuff out. And it's just your job to basically damage mitigate any bigger stuff and give them the chance to figure out the small stuff.
I'm sure there's a few PE teachers out there listening who are thinking that their curriculum is already very busy and they have to do X, Y, and Z sports and they're very limited on time. So why would you say that they should include S&C within their curriculum to tie along or with what they're currently doing?
Yeah, so for me, PE is about an exposure. It's about the chance. It's about creating as much exposure to as many sports or activities as possible to create that desire to want to try and do one of those sports at a more consistent level. You're not going to make an Olympian through one session from netball, but then their will or their enjoyment of that to go to a club and to do that full time is what is going to eventually spur that process on. And I think it's exactly the same with strength and conditioning in PE, or after that development, or whatever you want to call it. Our job is not to hope that everyone that comes through our program is going to suddenly join the gym and train 3 times a week, as awesome as that would be. But it's to give them enough knowledge that they feel confident. So one of the big things our head of PE at the moment says when we talk about S&C and PE, because she's a massive believer in it, is every student who's been through our PE program in terms of S&C should walk out at year 11 and feel confident enough to go to a gym by themselves and do a varied program. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. They don't have all the knowledge in the world, but they should be able to warm themselves up in a very structured kind of ramp style warm up. They should understand some basics around training, so balancing training, and they should understand how to progress their training. It's really simple concepts. Yeah. So these are the things that we push hard within our S&C. And in terms of prioritizing that, we try and keep it as balanced as possible, but it is a mixture of maybe 30%, probably around 10 to 30% of technical detail. So understanding antagonistic pairs or understanding how to check when to change the weight load, understanding intensity. And then the 70%, and then that 70% is made up of 30% of play, allowing them some room for freedom and to try things out. And 30-40% of a bit more structure in terms of what we should be delivering within our PE kind of syllabus. But in terms of why I think it's important is because if we think back again to that lesson plan, if you all were being observed, one of the biggest questions is how do we progress and regress exercises to meet the needs of all kids? That's super easy in the gym, whether you have weights or not. You can use your basic progressive overload model. So you could do your intensity, your time under tension, the speed at which we do movements, the direction in which we do movements. We could apply cognitive challenge to that. So have they got to catch a ball whilst doing a split squat? Have they got to change direction whilst jumping? So we can stretch and extend all of our kids just by watching what they're doing and going, he finds that too easy, she finds that too easy, I now want you to do this. And then what you create because of that is you see other kids who are maybe not fully bought into your program of starting with their body weight squats or their barrel overhead squats. They suddenly see their best friend who's now doing a loaded squat or doing a 180 jump to land. they then think, oh, actually, I want to be a part of that. And then that's where you get that extra buy-in, because kids love making stuff competitive, whether they're an 18 player or not. Like, some of our most competitive groups are our CDD groups, who just actually see that they can progress really well within athletic development, because there's not really a big motor. There is a motor skill development, obviously, but it's not the same as if you were playing a sport. You will see quicker returns in the gym than if you were learning football for the first time. So for our kids who don't enjoy sport, who are much more geared maybe towards their academic success, actually, if they can start seeing that their goblet squat's gone up 2.5 kilos in 6 weeks, or their broad jump's gone up 10 centimeters in 4 weeks, or whatever, suddenly you've got really good buy-in from kids who are very, especially in my case, who are very numbers driven. And then we get this really good return, which we are now seeing through the school. So when we first put this S&C syllabus in place, it was very much teacher-led, assistant-led, probably up to year 10, because we had to teach so much kind of technical info. But now, like, our year 9s are really competent. Like, I could literally set a session on the board now for our year 9s and say, I want you to complete this session using certain rules, and they would do it probably with a 70% success rate. So thinking about like movement competency standards, maturity to do it, and so forth. And that's across all of our kids. That's not just our best achievers, because of how we've kind of drip fed S&C in other areas like our extracurricular and our games, but then also how the bigger technical model and the more info we want to get has gone through our PE system. So because we've had that trifecta approach, we haven't had to take as much time out of our PE syllabus, and as such we've got a more rounded impact from that, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's massively beneficial. It's super flexible. It's easy to deliver with a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of learning. It's something new. So actually, in terms of teachers learning this, teachers should be getting involved. Some of our best older female PE groups are good and are better sessions because our teachers get involved. They jump in on some of the sets and reps, and all of a sudden, because the teachers get involved as well, it's very much actually, this is something we should be doing. There's no stigma around it. It is, everyone's in there for their own progression. So yeah, I'm obviously a massive believer, but yeah, I think that any school could get some good scope out of delivering it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few head of PEs or director of sports who may be thinking of adjusting their PE curriculum and what that might look like. So any recommendations around being a standalone module in PE, and just briefly how would that look? I know you mentioned some previously around how you might progress or regress exercises and what you might coach, but have you got any advice around creating a standalone module on S&C?
Yeah, so because S&C is not essentially it's not a academic lesson. You haven't got like a syllabus you have to follow. And obviously with us within the private sector, again, we haven't necessarily got to follow an academic PE schedule because we're not on a board for GCSE in that sense. So we can be really inventive. And I'd say the same for any school who's bringing in S&C for the first time. It doesn't necessarily need to align with the GCSE PE syllabus, although there would be some crossover anyway. So you can be inventive. So look at your staff. If your staff have people who are strong through, say, athletics, so sprinting, or jump coaches, or people who enjoy a certain sport, use that as your base, and then from there work backwards. So obviously we have your standard squat, your lunge patterns. They're fairly easy to coach. Like, I think most people can coach a squat after watching a few videos. Most people can coach a lunge to an all right level. It doesn't need to be anything. Remember, the art of coaching in this sense is getting consistency and repetition. If little Timmy does 400 squats a year, he's probably going to get better, unless his squat is already pretty poor. But the more you learn about it, and the amount of free resources online in terms of gym-based movements, you can easily dissect and analyze stuff and then put in place really simple little tools to help. I think where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck if you're going to bring SC as a standalone module is do stuff like plyometrics. Bring in things like jumping, because it's easy to teach. It's fairly simple. It's quite hard to get wrong. I think doing a broad jump is a broad jump for the most part. And then from there, be imaginative. So if one of your lessons is on single leg hopping, it doesn't need to be just jumping. You could bring in some really basic resources like tennis balls, netballs, footballs that most schools have. So then you're bringing in that coordination element, and you're also keeping kids involved. It doesn't need to be exhaustive. Just start somewhere really simple, and then from there build it as your curriculum needs it. If you're, for example, looking at, say, badminton, you could start looking at how like badminton players train. Again, really simple YouTube video. Watch their movements, break it down in terms of biomechanics. A lot of lateral movement, a lot of jumping, a lot of change of direction. That's where your jaws could start, and that's how you could feed it into, say, a badminton lesson and build in the racket and the shuttlecock and how we assort our body to get the most out of the play.
Have you got any recommendations around, I think at the moment we've touched very holistic around age groups, but how S&C might look differently in PE from the younger age groups as you get older towards the higher age, towards the older ages?
Yeah, so in terms of how that would look, complexity is the big one to begin with. So if with our year sevens, the session will be much more basic and our kind of goals and objectives are much more basic. So if we think about like one of our squat sessions, the kids will come in, we'll warm them up by doing the age-old bring Sally up, bring Sally down, right? But we have a little bit of a caveat to it. If they do half the song really well, that's it, that's their warm-up done. And this is also a chance for you as the coach to watch. So I don't coach them anything in terms of squat in year 7 when they come in and do the challenge. I just say to them, you're going to do half or maybe the full song. I just want you to squat and we'll see what happens. And then that's a chance for your coach or whoever's running the session to walk around the room, just analyse technique and think about what you're seeing, what shapes you're seeing, because then from there you can think about how you're going to lead the rest of your session or how much is going to be involved in terms of regressing and progressing movement. From, say, that, I would then look at really simple kind of squat roly-poly patterns. So one of my favourite kind of drills to teach a good squat is just get someone to squat, get them to go into a backwards roly-poly, and then roll back into a squat. So at no point in this session have I said to the kids that we are doing a squat session. I've just told them they need to do bring Sally up, bring Sally down, and then told them to do some roly-polies. And then from there, again, not even using the word squat, we then look at roly-poly into a single leg squat, roly-poly into a pistol. And one of our favourite kind of kids lessons, so from year 7, 8, and maybe 9, is the dragon squat challenge. So I don't know if you've seen it, but where the leg goes around the back of the other leg. And then we do a merit challenge. So any kid that can do a dragon squat gets like 10 merits. So like a massive reward, because we know that maybe 1% of kids can do a dragon squat because it's like really hard. But as soon as you show them that video, so we use the whiteboard for resources, suddenly everyone wants to be better at squatting. And then that's where you get that buy-in. So from a year 7 point of view, it's massively games-based. It's massively trying to give them a really big progression and regression spectrum so that they're not spending too long on one thing, because we know they'll get bored. If all you did was bodyweight squats for 40 minutes, even I'd get bored of that. So by keeping that as varied as possible, by giving them new little challenges, even if they haven't finished the previous one, we're still going to get that really good buy-in. Year 8's kind of same concept. We'll bring in, if we're keeping on the concept of squatting, we'll bring in some loaded strategies. That could be a pistol, that could be a single leg skater, that could be a dumbbell or a plate. It could be like a partner dowel rod, balance, squat, anything like that. In year 9 and a bit of year 8, we start talking about like how to progress training. Again, using that squat example. So we talk about like the 70% and also 7 out of the 10 reps should look good. And of that 70 out of 10, it should be getting difficult around rep 7. So we start bringing in a little bit of theory around how to progress your weights. We look at goblet squatting. In our more kind of competent year 9s, we will look at a little bit of barbell work as well, because we're lucky we've got some lighter barbells. But that's very much quite early on in the year. And then by the end of year 9, we will start kind of pushing towards giving them more independence. And we will then start looking at getting the kids to coach each other, because we know the best way of learning is to practice and then look at someone else's technique and go, actually, yours looks a bit different to mine. What are the common themes that should be right? And what are the common themes that should be wrong or will be wrong? So by year 9 and 10, we're expecting them to do at least some peer-to-peer coaching. And we will touch base on things like coaching techniques, so autocratic, democratic. We'll touch base on like visual learners using touch. And we talk a lot about touch and like things like asking consent. If you approach someone in the gym, being really clear about where you stand and how you deliver your information and kind of what responses you might get back. So not only are we talking about actual S&C, but the etiquette around how that's delivered. And if you were to be a coach, how you need to yourself to be professional, to safeguard and so forth. So we do touch on all these things in these lessons. Spotting. So in terms of safety, we talk about health and safety, so that we know that when kids are doing training by themselves again, they're being safe. In terms of year 11, so this is where we see the biggest difference in our S&C and PE. Our year 11s can choose between 2 pathways. So they can do like a health pathway, health and wellbeing pathway, or they can do a performance pathway. So performance pathway has a bigger push on theoretical knowledge and training stimulus, whereas our health and wellbeing has a bigger push on health and wellbeing initiatives and a bit more training variety. So like our health and wellbeing stimulus has more like fitness classes and more kind of information around different training types, whereas our health and our performance pathway is more around like nutrition, like training for power, training for strength, training for agility, performance metrics, to give them kind of those two caveats to whether they want to go into more of a performance environment. So it's not just aimed at our 18 players, but maybe people that want to go on to work in sport or PE. It gives our year 11 some variety too, so they can pick between the two options. In our year 11s, it becomes almost completely independent with supervision. We ask them to design a training program, we give them some basic knowledge, and then from there, it's up to them to research and deliver their own session. So we hope that the previous 4 years of SSC delivery, extracurricular delivery, if they're in the talented athlete pathway delivery, will be enough to then push them to use their knowledge and put together a fairly good session. Yeah, the biggest kind of progression to recap in our age groups is movement complexity. Using progressive overload, obviously we have weights, but you could do like time under tension, you could do speed, volume, and then actually getting our kind of year 9s, 10s and 11s to begin coaching and to be training independently and to be offering some level of coaching feedback. It doesn't necessarily have to be right, it doesn't necessarily have to be concise to what they see, but helping them recognise faults basically.
And I like the educational part as well. It's not just the participation actually doing it, it's actually coaching each other and educating, and some of them might even go on to be S&C coaches or PE teachers going down the line, so you're educating the next level of people that are going through that phase as well and might have a better understanding going forward as well. So I like the coach and athlete combination as well there. And also I think a theme that you mentioned was the difference from going from unstructured training to structured training. There's a bit around play and around younger athletes not having as much opportunity to do unstructured play. Can you just give a basic understanding of what unstructured play might be for PE teachers or sports coaches who might be unsure what that is?
Yeah, so for within our kind of S&C for PE, our unstructured play might be that they come in for a session and we might just have some really basic rules. It's semi-structured sometimes. It might just be, here's a set of cones, I want you to warm yourself up for the next 5 minutes. And it might be that some use those cones for hopping, some use those cones for change of direction. It depends on the group and the year group. So for example, our year 7s love to come in and do monkey bars. So we would just let them do at the start of a session or at the end, just literally 5 minutes of whatever they want to do, whether it's monkey bars, bouncing on the BOSU balls, playing with the TRXs. As we get a bit older, it's semi-structured. So we might say to them, we want you to warm yourselves up in 5 minutes. Your warm-up must include the following items. Although, yes, we could still, with the year 10s to 11s, play some really silly games or let them warm themselves up. It becomes a bit more structured. With the year 9s, 10s and 11s, we typically ask them to use the first 5-10 minutes as a warm-up for the previous session. So, for example, if we've done if we've chatted around, say, upper body training the week before and we've done a load of upper body movements, their task for the next week when they come in is to come straight in and do maybe 2 sets of each as their warm-up. Okay, and that's their chance to chat, to talk to their friends, for us as coaches to gauge the room, and then from then we can then dive into whatever the focus is of the lessons. We try and keep a portion of the lesson for them to basically do what they want to do, to give them that freedom, and then it also improves your buy-in because you've given them some of the control too.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, there's with the screen time and people not having as much opportunity to play after school or to do stuff in the playground, it's providing that opportunity again to be creative, have some fun, like monkey bars and things like that is a great way to do that. For these younger ones, let's say the year 7s, what key fundamental movements would you suggest that you should try and expose them to in your play sessions or in your PE sessions or throughout a block of training?
So the easiest ones to put in your unstructured session in a section would be crawling, jumping, sprinting, building in your coordinative elements too, so using balls, different shaped objects, frisbees and so forth. In terms of the structured session, obviously there is your classic squat, lunge, push-pull, brace and so forth. So the unstructured area is a lot easier. Even with the year 7s, you might say to them, can you try and warm yourselves up? And you have to do something that involves a sprint and something that involves a crawl and see what happens. Okay. Obviously, we know with our younger years, we need to give them a bit more direction because their knowledge might not be good enough that they can do that. It could be as simple as you just say to them, I want you to think about a game you played in the last 3 months with your friends and try and deliver that game as part of a group. As we go up the school, your unstructured can become much more wider. So you might say to your year 10s, I want you to warm yourselves up with something upper body for the first 5 minutes. Equally, we might flip the switch on that and go, actually, let's let the year 10s warm up as if they're year 7s again. And it suggests things like the monkey bars or suggest crawling games or like invasion games. Because obviously we also know that as you get older and your sport probably becomes more structured, especially if you play at a pathway level, you sometimes lose that desire to play for fun. I think that's really important that actually we give even our older students a chance to come in and to play for fun too. So for example, when we get towards exam season with our year 11s, we'll give them an option. We'll say to them, do you want to play dodgeball, football, or go in the fitness suite and do either some gym or some just dance? Because we want to make sure that they're getting a bit of training stimulus, but they're getting a chance to relax and get themselves prepped for their exams as well. So, yeah.
One strategy you mentioned before around how you implement S&C into PE is around movement breaks. Maybe also give a quick insight into what movement breaks actually is and how a PE teacher might go about implementing movement breaks into their sessions.
Yeah, so a movement break is like an extended warm-up in the sense that you can choose whenever you want to put it in. So if you've got, say, a 90-minute session, you might have a warm-up at the start, which is 10, 15 minutes, and then maybe around the 45-minute mark, you might then go towards a movement break. And these movement breaks can essentially be whatever you like to cover. So they can be either specific to the sport you're playing, or they can be as varied as you like. And we say specific, it doesn't necessarily mean specific in that sense. So you could do a squat pattern within a badminton session. Anyone could argue that there's a squat pattern in a badminton session, but the kids probably won't know the difference. So it's still something different to badminton. So again, I like movement breaks in the sense that it breaks up the session for kids who don't massively enjoy PE or sport. It gives you a chance to touch base on those patterns that we know are involved in sport and might reduce the risk of injury. And it also allows for like snippets of loading. So I remember Josh Wall delivered a really good chat on how if you were to do a 15-minute warm-up or a movement break across a school term, the amount of hours it meant in terms of physical loading and build-up. So it's also a really sneaky way of just building a little bit of training in a much broader sense too. And depending on how well your kids, like I said, that movement break could be very specific to your sport. For example, if you're doing basketball, it could be a plyometric session. Or if the group you've got just don't like basketball, it could be something completely different. It could be some like tennis ball drills, or it could be frisbee. It could be, I don't know, anything you can think of. It could be some hip hinge stuff. It could be some lunge stuff. It could be some balance, core, anything you like really. It's just to break up that session to allow a chance for whatever the focus has been to sit in the background for 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then come back in as the session continues on. You don't necessarily need kit for this either. It could be done completely free of hand. Obviously, you have to be more inventive if you haven't got any kit, but you could play simple little games. It could be tag games. It could be games with restricted space. It could be perform certain patterns. So one of the favourites that we play, not so much as a movement break, but more as an extended warm-up, is like your head, shoulders, knees and toes opposite someone. And then you might shout like 1 or 2 with designated numbers. It could be rats and rabbits. It's another favourite. It could be play a game of rock, paper, scissors and the losers run after the winner for a tag. It has sprint patterns in it, has ready positions in it, and it's a good primer to get kids awake. So that's the other thing is if you've got quite a heavy theory lesson or a sport where there's a lot of standing around because of either restrictions in kit or space. For example, I'm thinking if you've got a big group of, say, 30 kids and you've got 2 badminton courts, so you're playing games around the world and you've got kids who are waiting ages to play, you could go onto a movement break and play a game of, say, rats and rabbits, or play a game of territory tag, or play a game of like a modified net with a tennis ball. That way you're still encouraging some good patterns, you're still encouraging good cardiovascular fitness, and you're also reintegrating those kids who you might have lost because of just a lack of options to do anything whilst things are happening. Because I appreciate not everyone has like a full sports hall or a full gym. And it's just about being inventive and using that as a chance to get everyone back in again and go again.
No, I like that. And I like the thing around 15 minutes drip fed over a year. Imagine the amount of outcomes you could get from that, thinking about long term, if you had 15 minutes 3 times a week or even 1 time a week. But I think that ties quite nicely into, is a kit or gym needed? So we mentioned a lot of stuff around using gyms or using different pieces of equipment to deliver good S&C. Do you reckon On your thoughts, do you need a gym or do you need lots of high tech equipment?
Obviously, there's a magnitude, isn't there? There's a magnitude of effect. If you've got a full gym, then your options for progressive overload and your options for loading and variety of loading are greater. And we know kids like physical tools to help their direction of effort. If you put a hurdle in front of a kid and ask them to jump over it, they're more likely to do it than if you tell a child to jump, because they've got that physical tool to use. So if you have got boxes and hurdles and things like that, they are great tools to use, and they will definitely help your buy-in, because kids love having things in their hands, they love being active, they love challenging their coordination and so forth. But it's not the be-all and end-all, which means you have to be a bit smarter about the way in which you kind of use games to increase that attention. Most schools have bibs, most schools have balls, hurdles and so forth. So it's just about using your kit to be imaginative. Your movement break could be as simple as having a set of hurdles with 10 kids or 15 kids, depending on how your session runs, and just saying to them, I want you to create a little jumping circuit. Because if we're thinking about what we're trying to achieve with our movement break, like I said, it's to re-stimulate psychologically, it's to get their heads back into the task at hand. And then that secondary, I think the movement break for me is normally more of a secondary effect, is that physical loading of a certain skill. So plyometrics and talking about your tendon stiffness and your kind of force output, they're secondary. Like we're not so worried about that with all of our kids. Actually getting them to enjoy PE first and foremost, and understanding that they're going to get all these games within their PE is a bigger priority for me. So kit is definitely not a necessity, but it does help in terms of keeping your kids on board and engaged in what you're delivering.
And if you're a sports coach or a PE teacher with limited funds, have you got 2 or 3 pieces of equipment you might want to invest in first that you can see get the biggest bang for buck for your training that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so any type of ball, so tennis balls, you can buy lots of them. They're really cheap, which means you can have a much. I always try and think in terms of, does this kit work for 30 kids? So like hurdles, balls, big thick resistance bands, because you can play like resistance speed games with those. You can play like speed strength games with those as well. They would be my 3: balls, hurdles, and bands. I think they cover all. And the thing with balls is tennis balls are great, but if you can stretch to say like light, like weighted sand balls or mini medicine balls, because then in terms of thinking how would I justify this cost, all those balls can be used in athletic season. So if we're talking about shot put, we barely throw anything. The only time we really throw proper shot puts is when we're trying to test or get like data for athletics. A lot of our shot put sessions are with sanded weighted balls of similar weights, because then we can have 20 kids throwing at once or 10 kids throwing at once rather than one. So any type of ball really would go a long way.
And I think when I was S&C coach, one of my favourite pieces of equipment was a Nerf ball, one of those that whistles as you throw, because kids love to throw something as far as you can, and that generally travels quite a big distance. So that was one piece of equipment that kids used to love in my sort of games as well, invasion games and stuff. So we've got one question to finish around tracking movement competencies and physical abilities across the year groups and data. Do you do any tracking in your current work at the moment?
Yeah, so we have from year 7 to 9, we track overhead squat, broad jump, vertical jump, agility. I think that's it. 1, 2, yeah, that's 5. The rationale behind that is space, time, and logistics. So we can do those 5 tests. Is that all of them? Yeah, we can do those 5 tests in PE with a group of like 30 kids in 40 minutes. So obviously we're lucky because we have a just jump mat. But other than that, we just use a dowel rod for overhead squat, and we actually get the kids to rate themselves. So we essentially print out, because we've done this now for about 3 or 4 years, we have some school norm data, right? So what we do is we have all these little plaques printed out with the protocol and the test, and then the scores or the boundaries. We use boundaries rather than strict scores, and those boundaries are classified as above excellent, needs room for improvement, and so forth. And we essentially get the kids to carry out the whole testing. So we will say to them, these are your 5 tests. In year 7, we take them through it. But after that, we say to them, you need to now go and read the laminate, look at how to do the protocol, understand what voids a result and what doesn't, understand how to make your score reliable, and then from there deliver. Because we want to make sure they're able to use scientific skills and place their emphasis into an actual practical test. Obviously, we have speed gates too, so we do 20-meter speed. We test the speed over 20. In terms of data collection, we've been doing that now 3 or 4 years. So we're beginning to see a bit of a picture in terms of what metrics are going up and down and how then we can begin to tweak our PE program to meet that need. As you'd expect, the year 9 group is the biggest improvement for boys, and kind where we see the decrement scores for some of our girls come in as maturity becomes a bigger thing. So we test all those, and then we look at male female differences across obviously age groups. But it's used in 2 ways. It's mainly used to allow the kids a chance to look at their numbers, because again, if we're thinking about trying to spur some interest, all of our kids get report cards for all their academic lessons. So can we use some form of fitness physical assessment that isn't too harsh, that we're discouraging kids who are scoring poorly, but is giving them an accurate reflection of how they could improve. So we're trying to spur that interest for them to go, actually, my jump score wasn't very good, and I might play a sport or I might not. How can I now improve my jump? So we use that. If we're in the gym for some of our testing, because it's all on an Excel sheet, we'll open the Excel sheet up and we'll let them input their data, and I'll basically have already formulated it. So if it's a post-testing session, so if it's towards the end of the year, it will basically flash green, red or yellow if there's been an improvement. So then we can start talking to them about how we look at improvement. Is this just a margin of gain, or is this within a certain number that we can maybe say it's not quite impactful yet? So it brings about all these questions around training that they are good at, they want answers for. So all of a sudden you've got your lower ability player saying, oh, my score's gone down 4 centimetres in my vertical jump. Why is that? And then we can start talking about why that might be the case. And we do find, actually, for the majority of our kids, because of how our kids are geared in terms of their, a lot of our kids are very high achievers in maths and science, we then get a really big buy-in. So all of a sudden our kind of gym attendance uptakes and our extracurriculars go up, because we've had kids who have gone, actually, I want to improve that score from the start of the year, because that's how they're motivated in terms of improving their results. So yeah, we test broad jump, vertical jump, speed, overhead squat, and agility. We're thinking about a cardiovascular fitness test. We might try and tie it in with PE in terms of maybe like a Cooper's or a shorter run, just because we know obviously cardiovascular fitness correlates quite well with everything in terms of health and performance metrics. It's just space, time and logistics, obviously. Like we said at the start, in a busy PE curriculum, I try and do my best to keep my areas very much within their lanes, so I'm not eating into other people's lessons. We want to make sure the kids are being exposed to everything, and it's not, oh, they're doing so-and-so amount of weeks of fitness testing. We fitness test each group twice, once at the start of their block of training and then once at the end of their block of training.
No, that's great. And I think those could be easy practice. Well, like I said, no equipment was really needed. You could time it with a stopwatch instead of having speed gates, and you could even just do horizontal jumps if you don't have a jump mat, or have to touch the wall to jump as high as you can, for example. So there's definitely a lot of ways you can profile your students without even having any equipment there. That's a good insight into how you might want to track your athletes as well. But thank you, Josh, for your time, and I appreciate it. And hopefully that's given quite a bit of an insight into P and how S&C might be integrated within that. So if anyone's got any questions on S&C and P, how can they get in touch with you on that?
Yeah, so you can come from my LinkedIn. That's just Josh Marlow. I'll also pop my email below. So if you want to email me directly, we can always chat shop and go from there. Just one little thing to add in terms of our delivery of PE. We normally do it in terms of athletic development, either split. So one teacher might deliver some S&C whilst another teacher delivers a bit of a sport, or we deliver it with our older kids in 4 to 6 week blocks. Yeah,
perfect. Thanks, Josh. Anyway, I really appreciate your time. It'd be great to chat to you, and I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point soon.
Love stuff. Thanks for having me, Isaac.
Thanks, Josh. Speak to you soon. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a like, subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description, and we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.